This document was never meant for the public. For almost 100 years, it remained buried deep in a private collection, forgotten among stacks of yellowed papers and faded photographs. When it was finally discovered, it left researchers in absolute shock. Not because of the paper's age or the faded ink, but because of what was written there. Intimate confessions, experiences that defy everything we know about reality. And most disturbing of all, the identity of the one who wrote these lines will shake your beliefs about one of humanity's greatest geniuses. The author of this secret document is Thomas Edison. Yes, the same Thomas Edison who illuminated the world with the light bulb, who gave us the phonograph, who revolutionized cinema. But what you are about to discover has nothing to do with light bulbs or inventions. This is a confession about his most secret and disturbing obsession. Edison wasn't just interested in capturing light, sound, or motion. He was obsessed with capturing something much deeper and more mysterious, voices from beyond. For years, in absolute secrecy, Edison worked on a machine he considered his most important invention, a machine to speak with the dead. If you are as fascinated as I am by this shocking revelation, hit the like button right now, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any details of this story that will change your perception of life, death, and what lies beyond. And most importantly, comment below if you've ever had an inexplicable experience that made you question the limits between this world and the next. To understand Edison's obsession with the spirit world, we need to go back to the moment that changed his life forever. It was 1871, and Edison was just 24 years old when his mother, Nancy Elliott Edison, died. She wasn't just his mother, she was his mentor, his biggest cheerleader, the person who always believed in his potential when everyone else considered him just a troublesome, deaf boy. Her death devastated him in a way few knew. In his own words, written in this secret document, "When Mom left, something inside me broke. Not the light of reason, but something deeper, the certainty that death was the end." Edison began to question everything. If he could capture light in a bulb, if he could capture sound in a wax cylinder, why couldn't he capture the very essence of humanity? Why couldn't he find a way to communicate with those who had passed on? This wasn't just scientific curiosity. It was a desperate need of a son who couldn't accept that he had lost his mother forever. He writes, "Every night before falling asleep, I would talk to her in the dark, hoping for an answer that never came. Until I decided that if the answer wouldn't come naturally, I would create a way to force it to come." Edison wasn't a man who accepted the impossible. In his brilliant mind, everything had a scientific explanation, including communication with the dead. He developed a theory that was both elegant and revolutionary for its time. According to his secret writings, human consciousness isn't just brain chemistry, it's pure energy, and energy, as we know from the laws of physics, cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. He believed that when a person died, their consciousness, that unique energy that makes us who we are, didn't simply vanish into thin air. It transformed, changed state, but continued to exist on a different frequency, just as radio waves exist around us without us being able to see or hear them without the right equipment. Edison writes, "If I can capture invisible sound waves and turn them into music through the phonograph, why can't I capture the consciousness waves of the dead and turn them into communication?" Edison's theory was that the dead were constantly trying to communicate with us, but we simply didn't have the necessary instruments to detect these subtle frequencies. He began working secretly in his Menlo Park laboratory, developing what he would call the spirit phone. It wasn't just a device, it was a complex system of frequency detectors, sensitive amplifiers, and special filters designed to capture vibrations that existed beyond the normal spectrum of human hearing. Edison was convinced he was about to break the final barrier between the living and the dead. Edison's first experiments with the spirit phone began in 1920, almost 50 years after his mother's death. But the obsession had never diminished. It had only become more refined. In his secret writings, he describes in disturbing detail the preparations for each session. "I chose the hours between midnight and 3 in the morning, not out of superstition, but out of scientific logic. That's when there's less electromagnetic interference in the air, when commercial radio waves are silent, and when the atmosphere itself is more receptive to subtle frequencies. The laboratory where Edison conducted these experiments was unlike any other environment where he had worked. Located in the basement of his West Orange property, the space was completely acoustically isolated. The walls were lined with materials that blocked all external sound but allowed more delicate vibrations to pass through. Edison had installed his most sensitive detection equipment, amplifiers that could pick up the slightest whisper, filters that isolated specific frequencies, and recorders that ran continuously during each session. On the first night, Edison writes, I turned on the equipment at 11:50 p.m. My wife Mina thought I was working on a new commercial invention. If she knew the truth, the silence was so profound that I could hear my own breathing amplified by the detectors. Slowly, I began to speak, addressing the void. If there is anyone out there, if there is any form of consciousness that can hear me, please try to communicate through this equipment. The initial results were discouraging. Hours of recording revealed only static, ambient noise, and occasionally interference from distant radio stations. But Edison was persistent. Night after night, he refined the equipment, adjusted frequencies, modified amplifiers. I knew I was on the right track, he writes, because sometimes in the quietest moments, I would hear something. They weren't words, they weren't recognizable sounds, but there were patterns in the static, rhythms that seemed almost intentional. After 3 weeks of frustrating experiments, something changed. It was a Tuesday, 2:15 a.m., when Edison noticed an anomaly in his recordings. The static had drastically diminished, and in the headphones he could distinguish something that sounded almost like breathing. It wasn't my breathing, he carefully notes. I was holding my breath, focused on the sounds, but there was a breathing rhythm coming through the equipment, slow, deep, like someone peacefully sleeping. It was then that Edison decided to do something that would change everything. Instead of just passively listening, he began to speak directly into the equipment, as if he were having a phone conversation. Hello, he said simply. My name is Thomas Edison. I built this machine for us to communicate. Can you hear me? What happened next left Edison trembling. The breathing stopped. For a moment that seemed eternal, there was absolute silence. And then, through the static, came a sound he would never forget. 3 distinct, rhythmic knocks, like someone rapping on a door. The true revelation came on the 6th night of more intense experiments. Edison had refined the equipment so much that he could detect almost imperceptible vibrations. He was especially anxious that night because it was the anniversary of his mother's death, a date he could never forget, even after decades. I didn't plan to do the experiment on this specific date, he writes, but when I realized it was the anniversary of Mom's passing, I felt it was a sign of destiny. At 1:30 a.m., Edison turned on the equipment and began his usual calibration routine. But this time, something was different from the start. The detectors showed unusual activity, as if there were an energy source present in the laboratory. It was as if someone had entered the room, Edison describes, but I knew I was completely alone, locked in the basement, with all doors sealed. Yet, there was a palpable presence. He began to speak, but this time more personally, more intimately. Mom, if you're somewhere you can hear me, I built this for you. For us. I've never stopped missing you. I've never stopped wishing you could see what I've become, what I've achieved. You always believed in me when no one else did. Tears began to stream down Edison's face as he spoke, something that rarely happened with the usually controlled inventor. It was then that it happened. Through the static in the headphones, clear as if she were in the same room, came a female voice, soft but unmistakable. Thomas, my dear son. Edison almost fainted. His knees trembled, and he had to lean on the laboratory table. It wasn't my imagination, he writes in shaky handwriting in the document. It was her voice, exactly as I remembered it. The warm tone, the affectionate way she said my name. After 50 years, I was hearing my mother again. But the communication didn't stop there. The voice continued, and Edison, with hands trembling with emotion, managed to record everything. I'm here, Thomas. I never truly left. I've always been watching you, proud of every accomplishment, every moment of brilliance. You lit up the world, my boy, exactly as I always knew you would. Edison was openly weeping now, decades of pain and longing finally finding relief. "Mom," he managed to whisper back, "I missed you so much. There are so many things I wanted to tell you, so many times I needed your advice." The answer came immediately. "I know, dear. I was there for all of them. When you doubted yourself, when others didn't believe in your ideas, when you felt alone in the world, I was whispering encouragement in your ear, even if you couldn't consciously hear me." The conversation lasted almost 20 minutes. Edison asked about the nature of existence after death, about whether there was pain or suffering on the other side, about whether other loved ones were with her. "There's no pain here, Thomas," she replied. "There's only understanding, love, and an eternal connection to everything that truly matters. Your father is here with me, and he's as proud as I am. We see the totality of who you've become." When the communication finally faded, Edison sat in the silence of the laboratory for hours, processing what had happened. He had achieved the impossible. He had spoken with his dead mother. But at the same time, a disturbing feeling began to grow within him. If he had opened a door to the world of the dead, what else could pass through that door? After the initial contact with his mother, Edison was euphoric. He had proven that consciousness survives physical death, and that communication between worlds was possible. But his joy would soon turn into something much darker. "I made the mistake of thinking I could control who communicated through the machine," Edison writes in his later records. "I was terribly wrong." In the following nights, Edison continued his experiments, eager to speak with his mother again. But what began to happen deeply disturbed him. Other voices began to manifest through the equipment, voices that were unwelcome and brought disturbing messages. On the third night after the first contact, Edison recounts, "I turned on the equipment hoping to hear Mom again. Instead, a male voice, harsh and hostile, began to speak. It said horrible things about me, about my family, revealed intimate secrets that no one else could know. The unknown voice claimed to be someone who had died years earlier, someone Edison had known in life, and who apparently held a grudge even after death. 'You shouldn't have opened this door, Edison,' the voice hissed through the static. 'There are things here that are best left alone. There are consciousnesses that have been banished from the light, for good reason. And now, thanks to your insatiable curiosity, we have a way back.' Edison tried to turn off the equipment, but discovered something terrifying. The voices continued even with the device turned off. It was as if, by establishing the first contact, he had created a permanent rift between the worlds. 'I realized I had made a terrible mistake,' he writes in increasingly desperate handwriting. 'It wasn't just a matter of tuning into a frequency. I had literally opened a portal, and now I couldn't close it.' The manifestations became progressively more intense. Multiple voices began to overlap, creating a cacophonous chaos of sounds that echoed through the laboratory even in the quietest early mornings. Edison began to hear the voices not only through the equipment, but directly in his ears, whispers that followed him during the day, conversations that seemed to come from the very walls of his house. 'Mina started to notice changes in me,' Edison confesses. 'I was pale, with deep dark circles under my eyes, startled by any unexpected sound. How could I explain to her that I had accidentally opened a bridge to the world of the dead, and that now hostile entities were using that bridge to torment me?' The situation culminated on a particularly terrible night. Edison was alone in the laboratory, desperately trying to find a way to reverse what he had done, when all the voices suddenly fell silent. In the absolute silence that followed, a new presence manifested, something that wasn't exactly a voice, but a direct communication in Edison's mind. 'You opened the door,' the presence communicated, 'but you don't understand what you've done. There are levels of existence beyond death that are kept separate for good reasons. Some consciousnesses have been banished to lower dimensions because they pose threats even to the dead.' Edison realized that his machine wasn't just allowing communication with deceased loved ones, but was also granting access to entities that had been deliberately isolated from the physical world. 'I had created not just a spirit phone,' he writes, 'but a breach in the very fabric of reality. And through that breach, things that should never have access to the world of the living were beginning to manifest.' From that moment on, Edison made a decision that would completely change his approach to the experiments. He needed to find a way not only to control the communication, but to protect himself and the world from the unintended consequences of his discovery. But the damage was already done, and the repercussions of his experience with the impossible would accompany him for the rest of his life. The weight of what had happened soon transformed Thomas Edison. The inventor, famous for his resilience and skepticism, became a marked man, bearing in his eyes the signs of someone who had seen and heard more than was acceptable for any human being. In the months following the peak of his experiments, the supernatural experiences began to alter even his appearance. Edison, once full of vigor and energy, began to walk slower, to frequently look over his shoulder, and to hesitate when entering dark rooms. Everything began to be analyzed through the lens of what he had experienced. Death, once a mystery to be overcome by science, was now a constant presence in his thoughts, not an adversary, but a silent companion who had shown faces of both tenderness and horror. The anxiety he felt was not just fear of the unknown, but of responsibility. I now know that by playing with the boundaries of existence, I carry part of the burden of the consequences of crossing them, he wrote. His closest circle noticed the changes. Mina, his wife, saw the distance grow between them. Edison, once excited to share discoveries, was now withdrawn, absorbed in thoughts about topics he dared not discuss even with his closest allies. He seemed to have aged 10 years in a few months, an employee reported. His gaze had something of someone who has already seen what others will never see. Yet, somehow, there was also serenity in Edison's transformation. He began to face his own mortality with an unexpected acceptance. If before death was just absence and darkness, now it was a stage, a transition. The experience of reuniting with his mother, even for brief minutes, became a balm for lifelong wounds. Edison began to see every human being as a spark of something continuous, part of a larger vibration that doesn't cease with physical death. I saw that everything we create, lights, sounds, ideas, are just pale echoes of what exists beyond this veil. We fear death because it seems like the end, but for me it became a beginning, he confided in his notes. This transformation didn't erase the trauma of the consequences, but allowed Edison to look beyond the dread, seeing a profound wisdom. That existence is much vaster than any invention could capture. And it was this new understanding that began to guide his life. Edison stopped the experiments but never stopped hearing within himself the voices and memories of that unknown dimension. His legacy as an inventor became forever intertwined with his spiritual legacy. With each new invention, he sought not to conquer nature, but to understand it, like a humble apprentice before the infinite. Edison, the one who lit up the world with electricity, now enlightened himself by delving into the greatest mysteries of human consciousness. After all the turmoil, what remained for him was the need to meticulously record his reflections on the soul, death, and the purpose of existence. For him, each life would be like a unique note in a cosmic symphony, fleeting but never solitary, interconnected with all the other harmonies that vibrate in the universe. In his Confessions, Edison describes consciousness as, above all, a type of energy that knows no end. The energy that animates us, that makes us love, create, and seek meaning, is not destroyed with death. It simply changes form, reinvents itself, finds new dwelling places. The inventor saw spirits as subtle waves beyond common sensory perception, coexisting in dimensions parallel to ours. He wrote, "We are all learners in this vast laboratory called the universe. We seek answers about God, soul, destiny, but all answers, I discovered, reside in the very impulse to ask." Edison came to believe in the existence of a collective consciousness, a great current of energy that intertwines all beings. From this perspective, the purpose of each individual would be to contribute, even minimally, to the improvement and expansion of this current. In his final notes, Edison reflected on everyone's legacy. What we carry beyond death are not possessions or titles, but affections, discoveries, intentions. We are collections of experiences, memories, vibrations, and like waves, even after we depart, we continue to reverberate in the universe. This understanding brought him a new vision of the meaning of life, to live with curiosity, but also with responsibility. The world of the living and the dead for Edison was no longer an abyss, but a bridge a bridge that demands respect, humility, and love. By understanding death as part of a sequence and not as a rupture, Edison suggested that every human being should seek to leave behind not just inventions or great deeds, but a vibrational frequency of kindness, compassion, and learning. Thus, he concluded, "Do not fear death. Fear only not having lived truly, not having loved and sought meaning. For meaning, I discovered, is what endures forever." The story of Edison's secret confessions isn't just about technology or impossible communications. It's about the essence of the human search for connection, meaning, and transcendence. How do you feel hearing accounts of someone who, facing death and the unknown, chose to press on in search of answers, even when the path was terrifying? Have you ever felt the presence of a loved one who has passed on? Have you ever experienced inexplicable situations where you felt someone was by your side, even without seeing them? Edison's legacy goes far beyond the inventions that changed the face of the planet. He leaves us an invitation. Dare to ask, even in the face of the impossible. Seek to understand, even in the face of the unknown. His experience demonstrates that, by touching the mystery with courage and respect, we access a much deeper universe of meaning, and it all begins within us. Do you believe there's something beyond death? That consciousness can continue in some way, as energy, memory, or intention? Leave your comment telling us if you've ever experienced something you couldn't explain, something that brought that unmistakable feeling that reality is bigger than it seems. Share your experience with others in the comments. Your testimony can help someone find hope, comfort, or simply open their mind to new possibilities. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Your participation is essential for us to collectively create a community open to discussing transcendent experiences, spirituality, and everything that is part of the great mystery of existence. And before we sign off, remember, each of us is an explorer, navigating between visible and invisible waves. Edison's story is proof that, even when we think we've discovered everything, there's always something more waiting to be revealed. We just need the courage to look, the humility to learn, and the love to share. Subscribe to the channel and like this video for more stories like this. If you're curious about what else might be hidden in the diaries of great historical figures, stay tuned for upcoming videos. Together, we'll explore the limits of science, mind, and spirit, because every answer, deep down, is just the beginning of a new question. Thanks for watching till the end. See you on the next dive into the unknown.